It is a singular and most distressing burden to recount the events that transpired within the shadowed, book-lined corridors of the Miskatonic University Library in the wake of that blasphemous business at Dunwich. To the common inhabitant of Arkham, the year 1928 remains a period of vague, half-remembered unease. A season of unseasonable thunderstorms and whispered rumours concerning the degenerate Whately brood and the lightless screaming horrors that supposedly haunted the desolate hills to the north. Yet, for those of us who dwell amidst the crumbling parchment and the scent of ancient dust, the true horror did not end with the dissolution of the unseen monstrosity atop Sentinel Hill. Nay, it was merely the prologue to a more insidious siege, a silent invasion of the intellect and the institution that I, Henry Armitage, have spent my waning years endeavouring to document in a series of correspondences now known among the initiated as the Armitage Letters. The chronicle begins in the chilling damp of late autumn, shortly after my return from that accursed farmhouse where the air had tasted of ozone and ancient, fetid things. I had hoped for a return to the placid rhythms of bibliographic scholarship, yet the universe, in its cold and indifferent malice, had other designs. The Dunwich incident, despite our most frantic efforts at suppression, had acted as a sort of psychic beacon, a clarion call vibrating through the ether to those singular and unwholesome individuals who skulk in the forgotten corners of the earth. Rumours of the Necronomicon, that blasphemous tome of the mad Arab Abdul al-Hazred, and its role in the thwarting of the Whately horror began to circulate with a virulence that defied logical explanation. It was as if the very walls of the library had begun to exude a musk of forbidden knowledge, drawing to our doors a procession of seekers whose very presence seemed to warp the Euclidean geometry of our hallowed halls. The letters I exchanged with my esteemed colleagues, Professor Rice and Dr. Morgan, during this period reflect a mounting sense of dread that transcended the mere fear of physical violence. We were guardians of a gate, yet the enemy did not approach with battering rams or flaming torches. Instead, they arrived with the quiet tread of the scholar, the polished manners of the aristocrat, and, most terrifyingly, a profound and intimate understanding of the Miskatonic University Library's internal policies and bylaws. I recall with a shudder the first of these patrons, a man who identified himself as one Mr. Horton, purportedly a researcher from an obscure theological college in the Ural Mountains. He appeared in my office on a Tuesday, the fog from the Miskatonic River clinging to his heavy dark overcoat like a shroud. There was something profoundly wrong about the man's physiognomy, a certain flatness to the features, an unblinking quality in the pale, watery eyes that suggested a creature more accustomed to the crushing pressures of the abyss than the thin air of the Massachusetts coast. His voice was a dry, sibilant rasp, like the rustling of dead leaves over a tombstone. He did not ask for the Necronomicon with the feverish desperation of a madman. Rather, he presented a perfectly forged letter of introduction from a deceased dean of the Sorbonne, and cited with chilling precision the 1894 amendment to the library's charter regarding the access rights of visiting international scholars. This was the crux of the nightmare that began to unfold. We found ourselves besieged by entities that were, in the strictest biological sense, perhaps not entirely human, yet who possessed a legalistic cunning that left us paralyzed. They did not skulk in the stacks at night. They sat in the reading room during the bright hours of the afternoon, their presence casting long, impossible shadows across the floor. They followed every rule, observed every silence, and utilized every bureaucratic loophole to demand access to the restricted collection. My letters to Rice during this month are filled with a frantic scholarly desperation. I wrote of the batrachian odour that lingered in the reading room after certain visitors departed, and of the way the ink in the visitor's log seemed to turn into a substance resembling dried ichor. The horror was compounded by the fact that we could not simply refuse them. The Miskatonic University, for all its eccentricities, is an institution of law and academic tradition. To deny a scholar access without just cause, especially one who met every formal requirement, was to invite the scrutiny of the Board of Regents, many of whom were already skeptical of my obsession with the occult. I found myself trapped in a cyclopean labyrinth of my own making, forced to defend the very books that could bring about the end of the terrestrial sphere against creatures who knew exactly how to use our own civilization as a weapon against us. One particularly harrowing correspondence, dated the 14th of November, details the arrival of a delegation from a supposed archaeological society in Cairo. They were 3 in number, tall and swathed in garments that seemed to conceal more limbs than a man ought to possess. They did not walk so much as glide, their movements possessing a fluid, nauseating grace. They did not speak to the staff, but communicated through a series of rhythmic, clicking sounds that seemed to vibrate in the very marrow of one's bones. They brought with them a court order, a document signed by a judge in Boston who, upon later investigation, was found to have been dead for 3 years. Yet the seal was genuine, and the legal language was so dense and archaic that it seemed to have been drafted in some pre-human era of jurisprudence. They sought the Olaus Warmius edition of the Necronomicon, the very volume that Wilbur Whately had once attempted to steal. As I sat in my office, watching them through the glass partition, I realized with a jolt of pure, icy terror that they were not reading the book in any conventional sense. They were communing with it. Their long, pale fingers traced the sigils on the vellum with a familiarity that suggested they were recognizing the handwriting of a kinsman. The air in the library grew heavy and cold, and the faint, discordant piping of unseen flutes seemed to drift from the ventilation shafts. I wrote to Morgan that night, my hand trembling so violently that the script is nearly illegible. I told him of the non-Euclidean geometry of the shadows cast by the Cairo delegation, and how, for a brief moment, I had seen the face of the leader beneath his veil. It was not a face, but a shifting mass of translucent tissue, through which one could glimpse the pulsing of organs that had no place in any terrestrial anatomy. And yet, when I approached them to announce the library's closing, the creature turned to me and, in a voice that sounded like the grinding of tectonic plates, thanked me for my exemplary adherence to the principles of open inquiry. The psychological toll on the library staff was immense. Young Mr. Danforth, a promising cataloguer, was the first to succumb. He had been tasked with retrieving a certain volume of the Panacotic manuscripts for a visitor who smelled of stagnant marsh water and old copper. When Danforth returned from the lower vaults, he was white-faced and mute. He refused to speak of what he had seen in the visitor's eyes, or what he had heard whispered in the dark between the shelves. He spent the remainder of the day staring at a blank sheet of paper, eventually scrawling a single sentence over and over until the pencil lead snapped. The policy is the key, and the key is the lock. He was committed to the asylum at Danvers shortly thereafter, gibbering about the librarian from beyond. As the winter progressed, the influx of these unhuman readers increased. The library became a battleground of administrative maneuvers. I spent my nights poring over the university's founding documents, searching for any clause, any forgotten codicil that would allow me to shutter the restricted section entirely. But the more I searched, the more I realized that the founders of Miskatonic, men whose names are now carved in stone above our gates, may have anticipated this very situation. There were hints in the original charters of obligations to the elder ones and the preservation of the keys for the rightful heirs. It was a realization that shook the very foundations of my faith in the institution. Was the library a fortress against the dark, or was it a larder, kept stocked and orderly for the day when the owners returned to claim their property? My letters to Rice and Morgan became increasingly focused on the concept of the mask of humanity. We observed that these visitors were becoming more adept at mimicking our ways. They began to wear the fashions of the day with greater accuracy, though their clothes always seemed to hang strangely on their frames. They engaged in small talk about the weather and the local elections, yet their words felt like a rehearsed play, a mimicry of life performed by something that had only studied us from a vast and chilling distance. They used our libraries, our laws, and our very language to weave a net around us. The most terrifying aspect was their patience. They did not need to break the locks because they knew that eventually the rules would require us to turn the key for them. They were waiting for a specific conjunction of bureaucratic circumstances, a change in the Board of Trustees, a lapse in the renewal of a specific insurance policy, a shift in the university's funding that would grant them permanent and unfettered access to the collection. They were playing a game of cosmic chess, and the board was the Miskatonic University Library. In December, a man arrived who claimed to be a representative of a private estate in Innsmouth. He was a rugose, squat individual with a thick neck and eyes that bulged in a most unwholesome manner. He did not ask for the Necronomicon. He asked for the library's floor plans and the maintenance records of the subterranean vaults. When I denied his request, he calmly produced a document demonstrating that his estate had recently purchased a significant portion of the university's outstanding debt. According to the terms of the loan, he had the right to inspect any physical assets of the institution. I stood in the cold, dim light of the stacks, watching this creature run its webbed fingers over the ancient stones of the foundation. It was looking for something, not a book, but a point of egress, a place where the barrier between our world and the teeming, squamous horrors of the outer void was at its thinnest. I realized then that the library was not just a repository of books. It was a physical seal, a cork in a bottle of antediluvian nightmares. And these readers were the ones sent to slowly, carefully, and quite legally pull the cork. The final sequence of the Armitage Letters, written in the frantic days leading up to the new year, describes my desperate plan to subvert the very system I had sworn to uphold. I knew that I could not win by following the rules, for the rules had been subverted by entities whose intellects were as far above ours as we are above the amoeba. I began to systematically misplace the restricted volumes. I created a labyrinth of false catalogue entries and cross-references that would lead any seeker into a dead end of mundane theological tracts and 18th-century agricultural journals. I became a saboteur of my own collection, a thief in my own house. I wrote to Rice, "If they wish to use our policies against us, then we must make those policies a wilderness in which they will wander forever. Let them cite the bylaws, let them bring their court orders. They will find only a desert of paperwork and a mirage of misplaced manuscripts. It is a small and petty victory, a stalling tactic at best, but it is all that stands between the world and the gibbering madness that waits outside the door." The letters end on a note of profound and lingering unease. The visitors continue to come. They sit in the reading room, their unblinking eyes fixed on the empty spaces where the Necronomicon and the Book of Ibon once sat. They do not complain. They do not show anger. They simply wait, with the terrifying patience of the immortal, for the next librarian, the next policy change, the next crack in the armour of human law. I sit now in my study, the wind from the Miskatonic howling against the window panes like the voices of the damned. I am an old man, and my time as the guardian of the gate is drawing to a close. I look at the stack of letters on my desk, the record of a silent war fought with ink and parchment against the encroaching dark. I know that others will come after me, men of science and reason who will look at my mismanagement of the library with disdain. They will correct the catalogue. They will streamline the access policies. They will open the doors wide in the name of academic freedom and the pursuit of knowledge. And on that day, the scholars from the sunless places will be waiting. They will step forward with their forged credentials and their ancient legalistic claims. They will take the Necronomicon from the shelf, and they will turn the pages with fingers that have never known the warmth of human blood. They will read the words that were never meant for mortal ears, and the thin veil of our reality will finally, mercifully, tear asunder. The horror of the Dunwich incident was a loud and screaming thing, a monster of flesh and ichor that could be fought with fire and incantation. But the horror of the Armitage Letters is a silent, creeping thing, a monster of policy and procedure, of law and logic that uses our own civilization as a shroud. We are being unmade by the very tools we used to build our world. We are being read out of existence by those who do not even have eyes to see us. I have hidden the letters in a place where only those with a certain sensitivity will find them. To whoever discovers this chronicle, beware the man who knows the rules too well. Beware the scholar who never blinks. And for the love of all that is holy and sane, keep the restricted section locked. Not against the thief who comes in the night, but against the gentleman who comes in the day, with a letter of introduction and a perfect understanding of the library's 1894 amendment. The shadows in the stacks are growing longer now, and I hear a rhythmic clicking sound coming from the hallway outside my door. It is a polite sound, a patient sound. It is the sound of someone waiting for their request to be processed. I shall not answer. I shall sit here in the dark with my pen and my parchment, and I will pray that the ink holds out long enough to finish this final warning. The library is closing, but the readers are not leaving. They are never leaving. The correspondence concludes with a series of frantic, disjointed notes regarding the physical sensations of the library itself. Armitage describes the smell of the books changing, from the comforting scent of old paper to a fetid, organic aroma that reminds him of the Whately farmhouse. He notes that the shadows cast by the bookshelves no longer align with the light sources in the room, forming strange, rugose patterns on the ceiling that seem to pulse in time with a heartbeat that is not his own. In his final letter to Professor Rice, which was never mailed and was found tucked into a copy of the Regnum Congo, Armitage speaks of a final visitor. This individual did not possess the clumsy batrachian features of the others. He was a man of impeccable appearance, dressed in the height of Edwardian fashion, with a voice as smooth as silk and eyes that held the cold, sterile light of distant stars. He did not ask for a book. He presented Armitage with a document that appeared to be a deed of gift, dated 1636, which granted the contents of the hidden cabinet to a recipient whose name was written in a script that seemed to writhe and change as Armitage looked at it. "He smiled at me, Rice," the letter reads, a smile that was merely a rearrangement of facial muscles, devoid of any human warmth. He told me that the probationary period of the human race was nearing its end, and that the rightful administrators were preparing to take over the collection. He spoke of the library not as a place of learning, but as a filing system for the souls of 1 billion worlds. And then he asked me if I had kept the visitor's log up to date. This revelation that the mundane bureaucracy of the library was being used to track and catalogue humanity itself is the crowning horror of the Armitage Letters. The readers were not just seeking books, they were auditing the world. They were checking the ledger of our existence, looking for discrepancies, for weaknesses, for the moment when the policy of our reality could be legally terminated. The summary of these events, as reconstructed from the fragmented and often hallucinatory writings of Henry Armitage, paints a picture of a man who stood at the centre of a cosmic conspiracy that he could only dimly comprehend. He was a hero of the mundane, a warrior of the filing cabinet who realized too late that the weapons he used, the rules and regulations of his beloved Miskatonic, were the very things that would eventually ensure his defeat. The legacy of the Dunwich horror is thus not one of a monster defeated, but of a door left ajar. The Armitage Letters serve as a grim testament to the fact that the most profound terrors are not always found in the howling wilderness or the depths of the sea, but in the quiet, orderly places where we think we are safest. The library, that bastion of knowledge and reason, became a trap, a nexus where the human and the transhuman met in a polite, legalistic dance of doom. As I conclude this story, I am struck by the final image in Armitage's notes. A description of the library at midnight, when the only sound is the rustling of pages being turned by invisible hands. He speaks of the policy of the void, a set of laws that govern the spaces between the stars, and how those laws are slowly but surely being integrated into the Miskatonic Charter. The end, he suggests, will not come with a bang or a whimper, but with the quiet stamping of a returned mark on the book of human history. The Armitage Letters remain a chilling reminder of the fragility of our intellectual institutions. They suggest that our laws, our logic, and our very ways of perceiving the world are but a thin crust over an ocean of ancient, bubbling madness. And there are those other readers, who are constantly probing that crust, looking for a loophole, a flaw, a way to bring the madness through. They are in our libraries, they are in our courts, and they are in our very thoughts, waiting for the moment when the policy allows them to step through and claim what is theirs. The Miskatonic University Library still stands in Arkham, its grey stone walls weathered by the salt air and the passage of time. The restricted section remains, its heavy doors locked and its secrets guarded by men who have inherited Armitage's dread. But if one listens closely in the silence of the reading room, one can still hear the faint, rhythmic clicking of the visitors who never left. They are still there, sitting in the shadows, waiting for the next amendment, the next librarian, the next chance to cite the rules that will end the world. And in the dark, the Necronomicon waits with them, its blasphemous pages whispering of things that were, things that are, and things that shall be, when the Great Seal is finally broken by a simple act of library policy. The ultimate horror, as Armitage realized in his final hours, is that the universe is not chaotic. It is perfectly, terrifyingly orderly, but the order is not ours. We are merely a footnote in a much larger, much darker volume, and the great librarian is coming to close the book. The Armitage Letters are the last desperate cry of a species that has realized it is overdue for return, and that the fines for our existence are more than we can ever hope to pay. In the end, Dr. Henry Armitage disappeared from the annals of Miskatonic University. Some say he fled to the hills, driven mad by his own shadows. Others whisper that he is still in the library, a permanent resident of the stacks, forever misfiling the books that he fears will bring about the end. But those who have read his letters know the truth. He did not flee, and he did not go mad. He simply became part of the collection, a warning, a specimen, a cautionary tale bound in human skin and shelved in the darkness where no one ever goes. The Armitage Letters are his final testament, a legacy of dust and dread, reminding us that in the great library of the cosmos, we are not the readers. We are the books, and the others are very, very fond of reading. The silence of the Miskatonic now is not the silence of peace, but the silence of a held breath. The fog rolls in from the river, the bells of the university toll the hour, and in the restricted section a single candle flickers, though there is no wind to stir it. The siege continues, silent and legalistic, a war of attrition fought in the margins of the world. And as the stars align and the policies shift, the readers lean closer to the page, their cold, unblinking eyes searching for the word that will set them free. That word is coming. And when it is spoken, no library in the world will be able to contain the horror that follows. The Armitage Letters are the last record of our resistance, a flickering light in an encroaching darkness that is as old as time and as cold as the space between the stars. It is a darkness that knows the rules, it is a darkness that follows the policy, and it is a darkness that is, at this very moment, asking for your library card.